Okay, good morning, everybody. Hopefully, this will stop cracking here a little bit. All right. How's that? Can you hear me all right, or does that need to be louder? Is that good? Might make it a little louder. Let me see. How about now? Is that better? Yeah, that's a little better. Okay. So I want to give Dr. Maier as much time as he wants. And with that being said, I think we ought to start here in just like maybe 2 minutes or so. More time, the better. Um, you all know, at least hopefully, I think you know, Reverend Dr. Paul Maier. Dr. Maier has been a history professor at Kalamazoo University. Is that Western Michigan? Western Michigan University. Uh, for like 50 years. I'm not ratting you out on your age, am I? He's taught there for many years. Retired from there. Was a vice president of our synod for a number of years. Held numerous positions in our synod over the years, and has been here with us, I think, 3, maybe 4 times. And he connects the sacred and the secular. So what he does is kind of combines archaeological finds and digs with the Bible and makes that connection. He does it just wonderfully to show that what the Scriptures teach is true and accurate. So he is here with us today. He has a home not far from us, and like I said last week, I got a call. And he said, would you be willing to let me talk to the Bible study leader and see if they'll let me lead the Bible class? And I am the Bible study leader, and absolutely, Dr. Maier, you can come anytime and lead the Bible class. Just say the word. We would love to have you down here. I want to tell one little quick story about Dr. Maier. A couple of years ago, he was down here, and he preached for us. And he had this great sermon, and I think, Jonathan, you had played a hymn, and it was the hymn that the choir sang, where he actually saw his wife for the first time singing in that choir, and and so he at the first service we're singing that hymn, and he's telling me the story while we're singing the hymn, and I'm like, you got to put that in the sermon. So he weaved that into this great sermon, and it was just fantastic. So, we talk about I'd like to be like Mike, right? You know that phrase? I'd like to be like Mike, Michael Jordan, right? If I could be like Mike, if I could be like Paul, that would be my goal. Dr. Maier's a fantastic preacher. So I'm going to let him come up, and you can welcome him, and he can get started. You. I'm going to turn it on. I'm just going to put it right in your pocket. And you are good.
And Incredibles, quarter to 11, something like that.
Yeah, quarter after. You got till like maybe quarter after. You got about 45 minutes.
Good job.
Sound good?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Pastor Keith. The speaker usually says it's great to be here. The Lord says, I mean it. This is such a beautiful church in so many ways. Not only your active participation in the church program, But the beauty of the church itself is just knocks out. I don't remember being that much impressed by it, but it's terrific. The red tiles showing up in contrast to nearly everything else in Naples. Congratulations for choosing this location and for building this church. God has certainly been with you. I've had the privilege indeed of being here 3 or 4 times, and in one, I think this is the first time I've addressed you since I had my stroke. I had a stroke 4 or 5 years ago, in which I have a little remnant of it left over, which you can probably easily detect. I'm working on it, haven't succeeded yet, but it's one of those aspects that can be cured if you really try hard enough. I haven't tried hard enough. Obviously, I'm working on it. In any case, after I get started and I get angry at the enemies of the church, then I improve. You'll see it yourself. In any case, I'd also like to tell you that I have no rules. A Maier seminar or a Maier Bible class simply encourages you to raise your hand at any time. And I then try to field the question and run on with the lecture. Um, in the back, I have also side problems. I'm getting older, unfortunately, but I'm still working in that respect. So it's a case of join with me and let me tell you about a thing called apologetics. Now, apologetics is that branch of theology in which, if you have the occasion, an unbeliever comes along and you say, hey, I apologize, I'm a Christian, don't tell anybody. Actually, I believe like you do. That is not what it means. It is totally the opposite. It's a case of I apolego of in the original Greek means I speak back. I defend the faith. This is defending the faith, and I've never seen a discipline where the name almost sounds like the opposite of what's conveying. And so we work with that to begin with. And my latest effort has been kind of a summary of my life study, and that is comparing sacred and secular, as Pastor Keith pointed out. There are many ways of authenticating Scripture. When you see God's work in history, when you can see God's work on the Ten Commandments in terms of the absolute basis of the world's law codes. But I have always said, as a historian, I find the best way of testing out the faith is to test it against the background of its target audience. Has the birth of Christ meant more or worse consideration for humanity? Wrong approach. Because I think the best way to do it is to match the claims of Christianity against the background of what the world offers. And so I've been celebrating that ever since. And this is the reason why I, as a historian, a secular historian of ancient history, love to check the faith against the background of all the names in the Bible, all the situations, who's in charge here, is it the same emperor as claimed, and so on. Questions like that may bore a lot of people thrill me. I just love it. One of my favorite passages in the Bible is Luke 3:1, where Luke makes the reader turn blue in the face with all the names. I love to see how Luke lays out the situation at the time by checking who's in charge here. And indeed, he talks about even people like Lysanias was Tetrarch of Abilene. Who cares? That can't be Kansas, can it? No, I don't think so. But this is important because everybody that I know of in any culture has always searched for a basic standard of comparison. If this happened in the presidency or the kingship or the whatever the regime of so and such, that's what Luke does too in terms of the scriptures. Points out that John the Baptist began his ministry, and therefore the beginning of Jesus' ministry also was in the 15th year of the Emperor Tiberius. And then right away, you know, it's 29 or 30 AD. And so you can then check up on the Bible by seeing, does the Bible agree with that? Answer is yes. Jesus has to be born somewhere between 26 and 36 AD because those are the dates we know when Pontius Pilate was there in Judea in charge. And it's kind of sad that I had no more books of Pontius Pilate to bring along, but it's still a bestseller in some areas. I'm pleased to report. And it gives it a lie, really, to those who say there's no connection between the scriptures and the secular world. The connection's all around. In any book of the New Testament, you can see that. When Paul advises his audience to pray for the emperor in Romans 13, hey, he's talking about Nero, believe it or not, at that point. And so Christians aren't necessarily revolutionaries. They are at times when they must be for conscience matters, but Nero hadn't persecuted the church at that point yet. So it's a lot of fun to mix ancient history with the claims of the New Testament and see the result. The result is that you can double check about 3/4 of the verses in the Bible in terms of absolute accuracy. And it's been a lot of fun doing it. So, waging apologetics is something that I'd love every Christian to be able to do because the faith is under ridiculously heavy attack today, as you well know. I don't know what it is. Wasn't so bad in the first part of the 20th century. Too many serious things were going along. World War I, the Great Depression, World War II, very serious stuff. But then when we had the relaxation of hostilities, then it seems that those that work per usual and is trying to corrupt the church by attacking its leaders. Uh, my father, as you know, founded the Lutheran Hour, died too young at age 56. And so I felt I had to have the ministry twice as long to make up for it. That's the reason why I'm 93 now. And I should be stepping down, but I'm having too much fun doing the research and passing it on. So we're going to talk about apologetics in Jesus. I chose Jesus because he is the supreme individual, the man God, God man, who seeks the lost sheep. That's there to prove I was in church today. Uh, and who succeeds in saving them as well. And what a thrilling thing it is to find that if you aim at the supreme individual, most supreme individual who ever lived, that would be Jesus. And so, while this method of mine, checking the Bible against its environment, works for any book in the Bible, any person in the Bible, I chose Jesus because that's number one. After that, you can go to others. So, anyway, what I thought I would do would be to explain the subtitle. The Genuine Jesus, Fresh Evidence from History and Archaeology is the subtitle, because those are the means that I love to use in terms of the comparison. Uh, Archaeology is so great because if you get an authentic site, you can't change the past. And there's a hard evidence from the past. And so I love it, use it all the time. Very indebted to the archaeologists. All of them got their fingernails dirty in the digs and spent many hours, again, poring over foreign languages that are stamped into clay and then hardened in the sun. And my heart goes out to them because the stuff they discovered is so fun. What is the evidence in terms of this particular age, era, this particular era, I should say, and then the secular facts? So often you see a beautiful confirmation. Thank you very much. You find just a great confirmation between the scriptural evidence and the secular. Christmas is coming. It's too early to talk about Christmas, but if you're going to begin Jesus' life, don't overlook Christmas. The fact of the matter is, new stuff is being discovered. You can't redo history that way, but what I'm trying to say is, yes, here you have Jesus, the most researched life that ever lived. More books have been written about Jesus than any other individual. How do you do something new there? You can't do it. Oh, yes, you can. Why? Simply because new background data is being discovered on an almost monthly basis. There's a whole uh, journal out called Biblical Archaeology Review, which tells us only the most important digs in the past month. And this material is vitally important because every dig over there tends in one way or another to help clarify what's taking place in the biblical world. So we have, uh, depending on the age you're talking about in Jesus' life, if you're beginning, it's got to be Christmas. No question about that. Is there anything that's new in regard to the Nativity account? Yes, there is. Therefore, I will talk about throughout the life of Jesus here very quickly the new material that has been discovered, some of it by me, I'm thrilled to say. There's no feeling like the satisfaction of helping extend the border of human knowledge, do it correctly, and then be quoted afterwards. And so it's a real thrill. I would recommend archaeology or history or the ministry to any fellow among you. Ladies, sorry about that. Our Senate may someday let women in the show too. But at this point yet, there's a church convention coming up, and I don't want to be thrown out of the church. So, anyway, as you know, the low-flying critics, as I call them, come along, the skeptics who try to nitpick the Bible. They look around and find something that looks impossible and then say, miracles don't happen today, therefore they did not happen in ancient world either. That gets me sore because that is not a logical statement. You'll find in this case the discovery of the most controverted scene in Jesus' youth. What would that be? The shepherds, the magi? No. The most controverted item in the scriptural record in Jesus' youth is the killing of those babies in Bethlehem by Herod the Great. Misnamed, of course, Herod the Great, but he talks about the infant massacre engineered by Herod because he wants to catch the king of the Jews, born of a very undiplomatic question that the Magi ask when they come to Jerusalem. Where's the newborn king of the Jews? He's like saying, where is the new king who will succeed you any day now, you has been? Where's the prince who will, again, knock you off your throne? It's virtually the way Herod's paranoid mind interprets that. And so he asks the priests, where is the Messiah to be born? And Herod was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, you bet. Because whenever Herod was getting a little bit off the beam and would slaughter the high priest at a big swimming party down in Jericho, they drowned him. He had a sister who was jealous of all the queens, and Herod had 10 of them, because uh, they had privileges certainly that she wouldn't have. And so she concocted most of the rumors in the palace, which ended the one happy palace they might have had. Uh, every one of the boy babies are scheming to succeed Herod later in life. So Herod thinks. And so Herod was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him, because now they knew his ugliness will come out. There's wonderful things that Herod did. He has every right, the younger Herod, to the title of Herod the Great. But now the infant massacre is too horrible to imagine. All the boy babies, 2 years old and under, were fair game. And that, of course, is exactly what happened in the infant massacre, the so called Bethlehem massacre. When I was just starting in the ministry, like years ago, uh, I had a big argument with a professor on Staten Island in New York, who was a member of a different synod that shall remain nameless, like the LCA, okay? Anyway, uh, and he said, December 27th, the, the festival of the martyrdom of the babies in Bethlehem, is ridiculously timed because it didn't happen 2 days after Christmas. It would have to happen at least a month or so afterwards. And so, besides which, it probably never happened. It's a myth. Matthew's way of showing us a bright picture against a grim background. Uh, no, just the opposite. A grim picture against all the other bright scenes in the life of Jesus. And so I took him on immediately and had a lot of fun. A dialogue between correspondents that lasted about 6 months later, a little unChristmassy when it got to May, June, and July. Nevertheless, we had a lot of fun. In the process, I pointed out that Josephus did not mention it for several reasons. Now, Josephus, as some of you may recall from a previous lecture, cannot be thanked enough for the secular history which he gives to the whole New Testament era and the whole life of Christ. And so Josephus doesn't mention the infant massacre. Why not? Two reasons, one of which is true, one of which is imagination, I guess. One is he never heard about it. What, not hear about it? Since there were thousands of boy babies killed right there, I knew I had my opponent literally off in the corner because Little Bethlehem is a village of about 1,000. I talked to an actuary, and he said the village of 1,000 would have about 24 babies, 2 years old and under, half of them the wrong sex. So we have only about 20 babies that be involved. The record number, as Christians have beefed the number up, was a Flemish version in Belgium where they had 72,000 babies. Just a few too many. Anyway, uh, but it's true that in those days, infant mortality was so great that you were going to have problems there. The Romans never named their kids until 10 days later. Why? So that they would not carry a precious ancestral name with them before they died in infancy. Infant deaths were horrendously high in those days because of all the childhood diseases, no vaccination, and so on. So this was the same thing, they said. In this case, you're going to have surviving babies, only about 20 or 30. Um, and then there's another reason why Josephus never mentioned it. He has something more horrible to report about Herod in his last breaths. You may have heard of it indeed and not used it, simply because he is going to talk about I'll get to it. As I said in the book also, the reader should know that we'll be discussing this later on. Anyway, uh, first of all, I was shocked and happily surprised to find that the infant massacre is mentioned in a garbled version, admittedly, by a pagan Roman source. Now, that absolutely, when you have a pagan agreeing with a gospel writer, that is something to celebrate because right there, you know, the gospel writer, the person, I'm sorry, the critic here, or the supporter, would love to say this is a myth. And I would ask my friend in Long Island, Wagner College, if this is a myth on the part of Matthew, it does beg the question, what else is mythological in Matthew's gospel? One of the four sources of the original story of Jesus is telling myths. You there, right there, open the door to the horrendous uh, item in unbelief, which again the skeptics love to criticize again and again. Or they argue that Matthew here is providing a black frame around a light picture, which what a ridiculous idea that is. The joy of Christmas is a little bit interrupted, I'll say that, by the infant massacre. It seems an offbeat story as far as the the full Christmas story is concerned. But when you have a pagan author, which you would not expect this, telling the same story as Matthew does, when you clear it up, that is something else. And so the pagan Roman who writes this account of Christmas, of the Bethlehem massacre, is uh, named Macrobius. Macrobius, Macrobius. Aurelius Orosius Macrobius. He was a 4th century. Now I know some of those who know my argument say, "Oh well, he's a Christian who is then making this claim to make Matthew look good." Matthew looks good by it, I'll admit that, but he's not a Christian. He would not give the version of the infant massacre that he does, which is so full of errors that it was the only reason it survived was because of one of the most memorable statements the Emperor Augustus ever made, and that is the famous statement, "It is better to be Herod's pig than Herod's son." And you can see what a beautiful pun that was. Not only uh, porcum, the accusative of pig, but filium, they both end in um. A nice parallel there. But also, you know how pork is not at the top of the list in a Jewish menu, okay? So you're using something inspired by the Jews, and that's how you're going to survive because that's not the kind of food that Herod's going to mess with. So it's a brilliant statement on the part of Augustus, the rhyme and then the fact. But our interest is not that statement, but the preliminary, where Macrobius said, he writes this in a book called Saturnalia, which reports the banquet addresses of the great Augustus. Macrobius says, it was the end of the year, time for partying and so forth. Many of the trappings of our Christmas season are the same in terms of giving gifts, masters exchanging places with slaves and waiting on them and so forth. And just a lot of fun at Christmas time. But also it's a time for storytelling. And so here's the introduction to it. When Augustus heard that Herod the Great, after killing all the babies in Syria, all the boy babies in Syria, 2 years old and under, he said it is then obviously not to trust this man, but it was the one critical version of Herod the Great we have from Augustus, who otherwise was he had a friendship that he offered Herod, one of the great honors in the Roman Empire, because Herod was a great builder. He was a great emissary for the Jews across the Mediterranean world before the pagan world. And so he was very popular, except among the Jews, and whom he taxed very heavily. But he was the great builder of the new temple in Jerusalem, as you well know. He was a builder of 7 great fortresses in the Holy Land. He was the one who uh, was in charge of all the tremendous Hellenistic influences, building stadiums, big in sports, giving money to cities, and so forth. And there was a story that Augustus and his son-in-law Marcus Agrippa had no friends in the world better than the opposite. Herod and Marcus Agrippa and Augustus himself were the trio who were the most friendly. They were the deepest friendship. But now Herod's getting old. He's continually writing Rome for permission to kill one of his sons because they were conspiring against his administration. Because his dear sister, uh, Salome, there's another Salome, was fomenting a rumor in the palace. He didn't know that she was fomenting the rumors. Hey, Aristides, you hear what Aristobulus said about you and so forth? And then they would start to hate one another. And so the seeds of rancor were developed. And so she is the one who most deserves the uh, the opprobrium of history, because Herod might have been a much better ruler had this not happened. So Herod was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. Yeah, okay. Macrobius' version goes like this: when Herod learned that, in addition to having just, and again, this is where it comes to the interesting part. When Herod learned that the answer was babies are the ones, male babies, he decided to kill all the babies in all of Syria. Now, that's one big error. We know that it was not in all of the land, it was only in one location, Bethlehem. But again, I'm trying to degarbalize this thing. And doesn't bother me at all. It's only because what's the one thing you know about oral tradition? They love to exaggerate. And so a story of maybe 20 kids getting murdered, that didn't do much in a land where most of them, many of them, died in childhood disease. But all the babies in the entire land, that is impossible. They cannot see. Therefore, to begin with, we have to torpedo this verse and clear it up. So this is where the ancient historian becomes the detective also. We have to make do with so little evidence comparatively. To write a history of the U.S. in the 19th century, not a problem. You have every resource in the world. But to, again, um, write something that's coherent and then to exaggerate it, that's the stuff of which tradition was made. Now we know that that statement, because it's so clever, 2 puns, is going to take root and be told generation after generation after generation. There, you're going to find exaggeration. Also, in terms of what you called Syrians in those days. If you were a Syrian, there wasn't a governor sent out to you like Pontius Pilate. It was a military governor directly in charge with Rome, a proconsul or a legate who was answerable directly to the emperor for everything he did. So he would send annual reports to Rome. He would go back and forth from Rome. And that was not stuff of which the Roman government was made in the Holy Land, which, by the way, you have to find out what did the Romans call Herod's realm, either Judea or, you ready for this? Syria, Palestina. That's the full name of Herod's realm officially in Roman records. You see what happened now in the retelling, is, they always say, did you hear what Augustus said about Herod and so forth? They would finally get tired of adding Syria, Palestina, too long of a word. So they would drop the Palestinian retelling. So this is why you have all the babies in Syria. Okay? It works, absolutely. And you might say, like some of my opponents do, wait a minute, by now the Roman Empire is Christian. Not so. It was not completely Christian, virtually, ever, but it got to about 90% of Christianity, 90% Christian, at the end of the century in which Macrobius was born. Here is a surviving pagan. Why? Because he would know Matthew's version if he were a Christian, but he didn't use that. He didn't use the truth because he didn't know the truth. He only heard the rumor, and so did Augustus, and therefore that doesn't work. If Herod would have dared touch one baby in Bethlehem, one baby in Syria, the province of Syria, he would have been recalled to Roman executed. That's how fair Augustus was. But that wasn't the case at all, because it was Syria, Palestina. Right there, we're halfway to degarbalizing it, if there is such a word. You've got the testimony then in a garbled source, albeit very easily clarified, that you have a traditional generation by generation report that lasted up to the Christianization of Rome. And then there were a lot of Roman pagans who simply were witty sorts who would write for the New Yorker today or something like that. They are those who can tell a story that comes from the Bible. They don't know it comes from the Bible because Macrobius certainly doesn't mention Matthew. And yet Matthew comes through with flying colors because you can see the tradition building there. You can see again the effect of the Macrobius will use a pagan source and be talking in pagan language. He writes elegant Latin. He may have put the joke about Herod's pig and not even heard Augustus say that if he had a lot of creativity. And Macrobius did. And so we have now in a pagan reference, I think it's almost absolute by now. And a lot of Christians agree with me on that one. And there are others who are quoting me because of I decrystallized it. I demythologized it. Demythologized. So sometimes you have to work hard with your sources to make them speak to you to the present era. Yes, I am a Christian. Yes, I smile when I find evidence like this. I can't go at it with great objectivity, but I try to, because Luke did the same thing, having discovered all things very carefully with Theophilus. And so, you know what Theophilus is? Nobody does. Anyway, we think he was the mayor of Rome under Nero, as I try to demonstrate in my book, The Flames of Rome. So it's a fun thing to do. It's a fun faith. It's fun. It's not hard. You have all kinds of people filling in for the LCMS because two of our seminaries, that's all of them, well, no, not all of them, it's all of our seminaries. I regret to tell you that our church has not sufficiently used apologetics. We have surrendered it to the reformed bodies. The reason for it, one professor at the seminary, I won't tell you which one, began his lonesome elective on apologetics with the 35 students in the class, not the whole student body, by saying, fellas, you don't really need this apologetics thing. You don't need it because the Word of God is powerful in itself. Preach the Word, that's all you need to do, and the Holy Spirit takes over. Now, it's good theology, it's very bad practical theology, however. I think it's a cop out. I think it's the wrong approach because an apologist is not one who doesn't like the Word of God. An apologist is one who says, let's clear the trash away from the temple door so that the hearer, can hear the Word correctly and read the Word correctly, not be tripped up by these croquet uh, sections, whatever you call them, and that the critics love to bring out every Christmas, every Easter, every time it's a great miraculous time, or most recently, Pentecost. Hey, if those tongues of fire would have burned the most flammable part of your body, which fire will do, don't try to repeat the miracle of Pentecost. Don't want you all bald. Wouldn't look good. Anyway, no, it's a case of a critic can't even often find out what is being taught as the truth. So apologists are necessary. Our preparation schools, however, our prep schools, they are catching the importance of it. And so many of them are turning to apologetics, again, because of all the trash that's been heaped on Jesus from the last century, the last half of the last half century. And so, again, apologetics is fun. It should be learned, I think, by all pastors. There should be a mandatory course on apologetics so that when he thunders from the pulpit, he thunders with authority. He's in the process, again, not of making a big fuss per se, but of helping you people understand the truth and the way to defend the truth by clearing away the junk that's been heaped over the person and work of Jesus. Our Concordias are coming through. We have the Oswald Hoffman School of Christian Outreach in St. Paul, Minnesota. We have the church in I should say the church in Los Angeles, Irvine, California, Concordia Irvine, that began the 1517 Corporation, the 1517 Club of campus pastors who realized the importance, being on the secular campus, of how important it is to help that trash get cleared away quickly so the enemies of the faith don't use false information, which so many of these kind of critics deliver. So Concordia Austin is coming through. Concordia University Ann Arbor will soon, I am pleased to say, no doing on my part, the Maier Center for Evangelism and Apologetics is going to be a brand new outlet for the practice of teaching people how to do apologetics. And it's working in the sense of today you do apologetics by beginning where you are and your fraternity and your friends and your associates business-wise, and showing how beautifully Scripture can be seen through the eye of a cleaned up Scripture and God's Word as it was actually given. And that's very, very important at a time when the faith is under heavier attack than any other time in history. Critics have tried everything in the process to dislodge it. They even tried to get Jesus married off. Oh, that's a popular one. I think no woman today who has a 55-year-old son who hasn't found a wife has nearly as much incentive to get the faith to get a husband for her daughter, or vice versa. Then we find among those who tried to get Jesus married off. They try everything. And who's the prime candidate? Who's Mrs. Jesus? Mary Magdalene. I don't know how to love him and so forth. That's the last solo, I promise. Anyway, uh, she was a Harvard University professor, which was bamboozled into thinking that this was a fraud. It was the press that first skeptically says, "I'm not sure about this," and indeed, it was the Atlantic Monthly that had a reporter there, not particularly a religious reporter, but he did a Jim Dandy job of investigating how Karen Armstrong was able to find this piece of Coptic, that's Egyptian, ancient Egyptian, and then claim it was authentic. Well, she had a fellow come in with this interesting document in which it says, Jesus is talking, he says, Mary Magdalene, my wife. And that, of course, that shows Jesus was married after all. Too bad they didn't mention his wife until now. And now Harvard and Karen get this marvelous accolade of finding the proof that Jesus was married, and Mary was her name. Ridiculous. So here you have the Saturday evening, not Saturday evening Post, but the Atlantic Monthly pointing out the truth here. That the guy who brought this in was a specialist in ancient Coptic. Aha, that says something, doesn't it? So he brought it to her for translation, and he knew every word himself. So then he publishes that, and then the thing was blown right in her face. And Karen had to finally admit that that's probably what happened. 2 years in a row, the Public Relations Department at Harvard Divinity School tried to get this story accepted by the world of scholarship, and it was never accepted. And there's a good reason why. It was based on a fraud, that simple. And the guy who did it finally admitted and described how the fraud was conducted. And so, even so, she tried the second year to do it. So please don't let a reverend name like Harvard or any of the other blue-blooded schools say that they have all the truth. Very often they are led astray by outright fraud. And so it goes also with people who in the past have done this. When I grew up, the big bête noir, the Black Beast, was Rudolf Bultmann. Remember him at Marburg University? And his Entmythologisierung of the Bible, demythologizing the Bible. He says, we know next to nothing about Jesus of Nazareth. The sources that give us any word are conflicting. Of course, he includes the secular negative sources as well. But he's totally passe now, because in the third wave of Jesus research, which is the wave we're in right now, it's a compromise between the ancient, throw the baby out with the bathwater, and the recent discoveries. Today, it's a case of, hey, what do you know? The Bible has more truth in it than we ever thought was possible. And so, Charles Worth, a great scholar, a good scholar, and so David Noel Friedman, who taught at the University of Michigan, and then went out to University of Arizona. He is the author, the editor of the Anchor Bible Dictionary. You know what that is? Pastors have a 6-volume edition of the Bible there. I mean, an encyclopedia. And David Noel Friedman, he's just a niche guy. He corresponded with me on the different finds. And he also believes that we've got an earlier authorship of scriptures than the world gives us credit for. There's a Korean scholar, a Korean convert Christian scholar, who did a work on P46, Papyrus 46, which is the Chester Beatty Papyrus. It is only the Pauline corpus, only Paul's epistle, therefore the earliest part of the scriptures. And he says that the evidence is overpowering. And so I have a whole controversy, I mean, it's controversial, a chronology section of the new book in which I point out that using his work, but giving him credit for it. P46 is an example of all kinds of additional punctuation data that would not be in the original source in the second century, where everything else is thrown, where they don't know when the date is. The British Museum says second century. He thinks it was in the latter part of the Flavian dynasty that you have this evidence. And Flavian dynasty is Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. And we have no persecutions under Flavius, under Domitian. I'm sorry, we have no persecutions under Vespasian or Titus, interestingly enough. And so some of the earliest apologetics done by the Christian scholars of Athens were the giants in apologetics. People like Justin Martyr, Tertullian. There's an Armenian, you can tell that with I-N to his name. And he came again from the first Christian country, which is Armenia. And these people wrote letters to Trajan and Hadrian, the first two of the five good emperors in the second century, and defended the faith and put their names on it and returned addresses. I mean, you want to get addresses? Go help yourself. We're ready. Give our lives to the faith. That's heroism. That's how to do apologetics, man. And the result, you don't hear this very often. The Roman persecutions were not one long horror story. They were fits and starts. They were, for instance, the Emperor Trajan got a letter from Pliny the Younger in a section of Turkey today called Bithynia, which is just across from Istanbul on the Canadian side. And he says, "Dear Trajan, what do I do? Christians are against the law, but hey, I found they're pretty mild people. They follow most of our laws. St. Paul claims he prays for the emperor. Now, Romans 13, you can see how the Christian attitude towards St. Paul was, of St. Paul. And therefore, what do I do about these Christians? They get together on Sunday and they sing hymns to Christ as to a God. So as early as 110 in Christianity comes the development of Christology to the point of view of Christ again being God. These are things overlooked by history. The Romans were horrible from beginning to end. No, they weren't. Hadrian, in fact, writes to his governor Fundanus and says, "I'm getting sick and tired of these tattletales against the Christians." Even though he's a pagan himself, he says, he even tells the Christians, "You're okay, just don't be obvious about your faith too much." But he says, "Verily, if I am bothered one more time from these pagans constantly tattling on the Christians, I'll punish them instead." How do you like that? You don't ever hear that, do you? So in the first half of the second century, you have a time of peace for the church. It grew mightily during that time, says Eusebius, the earliest Christian church historian. This is what an apologist can do. And he had fun in the process of doing it. And it's not hard, folks. It's just knowing the facts of the past and then playing around with the sources yourself. I expect one or two of you will love to take it up, in which case, good, I was doing something right. It's a thrilling thing, it really is. And so in our church, not only are the campus pastors taking it up, but there will be locations taking it up too. And that's why it's linked to evangelism, as it does in St. Paul. The Maier Center for Apologetics and Evangelism is going to be in Grand Rapids, in Detroit, Ann Arbor, of course, and it's linked to evangelism, which is exactly as it should be. Make sure, as you talk about the deification of Christ, that you give credit to those evangelists who are used by God in the process. So that's the kind of fun it is. And so I guess I'll have done my own fight right at the end, which could be any day now. And I look forward to the determination to be with God, which is always far better. The other discoveries that I made in the process, I was shocked. The discovery I had to make was the story of Good Friday. I gotta talk fast. I'll talk a little faster because I see that verily.
I'm just going to put that up there and you can talk about that real quick. You have about 5 minutes.
Okay, good, sure. Thank you. I was astounded to find that when the Chaim Cohen, back in the early 60s, who was the prime minister, he was the chief justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, had read my Pontius Pilate, and he criticized it because I called Annas and Caiaphas the biblical version. They were the head of the prosecution on Good Friday against Jesus, right? And so he says, no, they were, get this, they were Jesus' dear friends who were trying to keep him out of trouble with Pilate and the Romans. Wow. Not only was it against the Bible, as much as the fact that he was inheriting a Jewish tradition which was now 2,000 years ago, 2,000 years old. Hard to believe when you run with the wrong idea from that time. So I wrote back a critique, a courteous critique of how it was awful wrong. It was really incorrect here because your own traditions, I said, the rabbinical traditions of Judaism in the Talmud call Annas and Caiaphas traitors to the country. Woe to the house of Annas. Woe to their serpent-like hissing is the way the Talmud has it. And I pointed that back to him. And so I was hoping they would give it to Chaim Cohen. But what they did was even better. They published my entire letter, word for word, in 6 columns at the top of the page. Every word in my letter was published fairly at the Jerusalem Post. So that one was a lot of fun to see that now for the first time, many Jews in Israel heard the Christian version, which seems to be the Jewish version too. They were not heroes to anybody. But these are the kind of things that you'll hear the fact, you'll hang on to it because it's so stunning that this late in the 20th century. Then when we get to the greatest event of all, the Easter event, it's just lots of fun to, well, not only date the crucifixion, we got that down. It's April 3rd, 33 AD. Biblical scholarship had narrowed it down to the 7th of April in 30 AD or 3rd of April in 33 AD. And again, I found that I think I'm the first one to do that in the biblical scholar world because fortunately for Josephus and for history, he tells us more about Pontius Pilate. Fortunately for Pontius Pilate, I should say, and history, he tells us more about Jesus, he tells us more about Pontius Pilate than any other governor of Judea. And he's the one whereby we draw so much material that helps illuminate what the Bible tells us. And remember, after Pilate turns the case over to Herod Antipas, Herod the Great's most successful son, the Bible says, and Herod and Pilate were made friends that same day because before this they'd been hostile with one another. The Bible doesn't tell us why they were hostile, but Josephus does. And so we have to add that to the true passion story. Very important. Indeed. The Easter event itself is perhaps the most fun of all because nobody believes in the critical world in a resurrection. Doesn't happen today, didn't happen then. And this is where I bring out the various humanly contrived versions of the Easter event. Ridiculous. One's worse than the next or previous. Ever heard of the salad theory of the resurrection? Yeah, they came to the tomb, and the gardener didn't like his tulips being trampled by tourists. And so he then digs at the body of Jesus and then buries it again elsewhere. That's why the tomb was empty. And all of these fakey examples are to try to prove that Jesus' body was stolen. That's the only logical one that could work. Because all the rest of them, again, all of them have an empty tomb. How the tomb got empty, that's where you have all the various versions. And I just have more fun giving you the crazy version, and then in one sentence demolishing it, and then going on to the next, and then talking about the empty tomb, where we have quite an interesting challenge in our hands, and that is there is a time when the tomb was not guarded. That was Friday night by our standards. And yet, I show how that was impossible also. And so I finally laid it out. I said, if, as secular historians only, I must say that using all the tools of historical methodology, it is appropriate to say that the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, in which Jesus was buried on Friday, was in fact empty on Sunday morning, as a historical fact, as a secular fact, as one that ought to appear in every church, in any non-church handbook. I don't think it will, but there's one voice challenging anybody to oppose my argumentation. So as I say, it's a lot of fun. Try it, you'll like it. I wish I was trying to give you a full seminar here in 1 hour. I didn't talk.
Back next week?
Not staying long. Wish I could.
Well, we'll have you back whenever you're in the area. So Dr. Maier's going to be has books over here. If you want a book signed, I'm sure he'll be happy to do that for you. And he's got this new book out that is covering a lot of the information that he shared with you today, and I'm sure a lot more depth because you only have 45 minutes to cover all of this. It might take a little longer, so I would enjoy the read instead too. That would be good.
One last statement, and that is the reason I have it available is because my publisher ignored my warnings about don't follow inflation. Because a hardcover book like that, illustrated and so forth, they charge $34.95. And I figure that's horrible. You can't do it. Don't go over 29. And so for that reason, using author's discount plus buying $6,000 worth of books in advance, I got the maximum discount. So I'm offering them for $25 instead of $35. The only way I could do it is selling them myself. That's my excuse for going commercial.
Well, they're over for sale, so you can visit with him. I'm going to go get ready for church. All the early service people, hang around, spend some time with Dr. Maier, and chat with him a little bit. I'm sure he'd love to talk to you. So, thank you very much. God bless you.
It's yours, buddy. We can sign a little.
I'm gonna grab that little microphone.
Oh, yeah.
so you don't have to mess with it.